I'm 84 years old, and I waited too long to forgive my father. By the time I understood what forgiveness really meant, he was already gone, and there was nothing left for me to do with the understanding except carry it around. I live alone now in a small house that feels larger every year. The mornings are the hardest because they are so quiet. I sit with my tea, and sometimes I find myself thinking about things I believed I had forgotten. But they return anyway, usually in small, ordinary ways. The sound of a chair moving, the smell of engine oil, the sight of a man standing with his hands behind his back while looking at something that needs fixing. I do not tell this story because I believe it will fix anything. There is nothing left to fix. I tell it because I have learned how easily a lifetime can slip past while you are certain there will be another chance to say what matters. My father was not an easy man. That is the simplest way to say it. He worked as a mechanic, and his hands were always cracked and stained, no matter how much he scrubbed them. He spoke very little, and when he did, it usually sounded like instruction rather than conversation. He believed in work. He believed in keeping your head down. He believed that feelings were something you swallowed so they would not interfere with what needed to be done. As a boy, I wanted him to notice me in ways he never did. I remember bringing home school drawings and placing them on the kitchen table where he would see them when he came in. He would glance at them, nod once, and ask if I had finished my chores. I do not think he meant to be dismissive. I think he simply did not know another way to be. My mother filled the house with words, and my father filled it with presence. When he entered a room, you felt it immediately. He carried tiredness with him like a coat he could never remove. When I was 12, he began taking me to the garage on Saturdays. He never asked if I wanted to go. He simply said, "Be ready at 7. I remember those mornings clearly. The cold seats in his truck, the smell of gasoline and metal, the radio playing quietly between us while we drove without speaking. At the time, I thought the silence meant he had nothing to say to me. Now I wonder if he believed sitting beside me was already saying something. As I grew older, I began to resent him, not loudly, not in ways that caused fights, but in a slow, steady way that felt justified. My friends had fathers who laughed and told stories. Mine pointed at broken carburetors and expected me to understand what he meant without explanation. By the time I was in my 20s, I had decided that I would be nothing like him. I left our town as soon as I could. I told myself I was building a life, which was true, but I was also creating distance, which I pretended not to notice. He never tried to stop me from leaving. He stood in the driveway the morning I packed my car. He nodded once and told me to check my tire pressure before long drives. That was his goodbye. For years after that, our conversations stayed brief. Phone calls on holidays, occasional visits where we spoke mostly about practical things. He would ask about my job. I would answer. He would nod. I would feel irritated by his lack of curiosity, though I never asked him any real questions either. I married in my early 30s. My father attended the wedding wearing a suit that looked uncomfortable on him. He shook my hand instead of hugging me. At the time, I felt embarrassed by him. I hate admitting that now, but it is true. When my first child was born, he visited the hospital. He stood beside the crib, staring at my daughter as if she were a fragile machine he did not know how to repair. He touched her hand once very gently, and then stepped back as though he had done something wrong. I remember feeling frustrated that he did not show more emotion. I thought he did not care enough. I did not see that he might have cared so much he did not trust himself to show it. The years filled quickly after that. Work demanded more of me. Promotions, longer hours, travel. I convinced myself I was doing it for my family. There is some truth in that, but there was also pride involved. I liked being respected. I liked being busy enough to avoid thinking about uncomfortable relationships. My father aged quietly during those years. My mother would mention his back pain or his hearing getting worse. I would say I would visit soon. I usually meant it when I said it, but soon has a way of stretching until it disappears. When my mother died, everything shifted. I went back for the funeral. My father looked smaller standing beside her coffin. That was the first time I noticed how fragile he had become. We sat in his kitchen after everyone left. He made tea for both of us. I remember how carefully he carried the cups, as if they might spill secrets if he moved too quickly. He tried to talk about her. The sentences came out broken and incomplete. I felt uncomfortable and changed the subject to practical matters: bills, repairs, arrangements. I told myself I was helping him stay strong. I see now that I was helping him stay silent. After my mother died, he called me more often. The conversations were awkward. He would ask what I had eaten for dinner. He would tell me about the weather. Sometimes he would start a sentence about something else and then stop midway. There were moments when I sensed he wanted to say more. I felt it hanging in the pauses, but I never asked him to continue. I told myself that if something truly needed to be said, he would say it clearly. I visited him less than I should have during those years. I was approaching retirement and deeply involved in planning what I believed would be a peaceful future. Travel brochures, financial meetings, home renovations. I thought I was organizing the final stage of my life carefully. I did not realize I was neglecting one of the last chances to repair the beginning of it. Our only serious argument happened when I was 61. He had fallen while working in his shed and refused to consider moving closer to me. I told him he was being stubborn. He told me I had no understanding of what it meant to leave the only home you had ever known. I said things I cannot take back. I told him he had never tried to understand anyone else's feelings, so why should I understand his? I remember the way he looked at me then, not angry, just tired. We did not speak for nearly a year after that. The silence between us felt normal at first. We had always been men who spoke little. I assumed time would soften things. I believed there would be a natural moment when one of us would call and the distance would quietly disappear. Instead, time hardened it. When I finally called, he sounded relieved, though he tried to hide it. We spoke politely, carefully, like neighbors who had once been friends but were no longer certain how to behave. I planned to visit him that winter. I postponed the trip twice because of minor things: house repairs, a lingering cold, a commitment I could have easily canceled. Each delay felt reasonable at the time. He suffered a stroke 3 weeks before my third planned visit. I arrived at the hospital and barely recognized him. Half of his face was still. His speech came out in fragments, but his eyes were clear, and they followed me around the room as if he were trying to hold on to something that was already slipping. I sat beside his bed and spoke more than I had ever spoken to him before. I told him I was sorry for our argument. I told him I had misunderstood him. I told him I wished we had spent more time together. He tried to respond. His lips moved, but the words would not form. He reached for my hand. I held it, and it felt smaller than I remembered, lighter, as if time had been quietly carrying pieces of him away for years. He died 2 days later. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a death, when unfinished words are still echoing. It does not fade. It simply becomes part of the air around you. I sorted through his belongings after the funeral. Most of his life fit into a few drawers and a workbench covered in carefully labeled tools. In one drawer, I found a small box filled with things I had given him as a child: school photographs, a broken watch I had tried to fix, drawings I thought he had ignored. He had kept all of them. I sat on the floor of his bedroom holding those things, and it felt like reading a language I had refused to learn when there was still time to understand it. What I lost was not just the chance to say I forgave him. I lost the chance to know him as a complete person. I lost the chance to let him know me beyond the version of myself that stayed guarded and resentful. I lost the opportunity to sit beside him without waiting for him to become someone else first. Forgiveness, I have learned, is not about declaring someone free from blame. It is about allowing them to remain human in your memory. I denied him that while he was alive. The years since his death have been filled with ordinary days. Retirement came and settled around me exactly as planned. I traveled, I fixed the house, I watched my grandchildren grow. From the outside, it has been a comfortable life, but comfort does not erase unfinished conversations. Sometimes I catch myself repeating his habits, the way I stand quietly when something is wrong, the way I fix things before I discuss them. My children have told me I am difficult to read. I hear my father in those words. If you are listening to this, I am not asking you to forgive anyone. I do not know your history. I do not know your wounds. I only know how easily pride disguises itself as self-respect, and how quietly time moves while you are certain you are waiting for the right moment. There is rarely a right moment. There are only opportunities that look inconvenient at the time and irreplaceable later. I used to believe relationships could be paused and resumed like conversations interrupted by a phone call. I know now they are more fragile than that. They change while you are not looking. They close while you are planning to return. I often wonder what my father tried to say during that final attempt in the hospital. I will never know. The mind creates possibilities, but none of them carry his voice. At my age, memories become louder than the present. I sit in my garden and sometimes speak to him out loud, not in search of answers, just to place words into the space where they should have existed years ago. I have very little time left. That is not said with fear. It is simply the arithmetic of being 84. The future has grown shorter than the past, and that changes how you measure things. If there is one truth I carry now, it is that silence is heavier than conflict. Conflict at least leaves marks you can examine. Silence leaves empty spaces that cannot be studied or repaired. I have learned to live with that emptiness. It sits beside me like an old companion. Some days it is quiet. Some days it reminds me of everything I postponed. My father's tools are in my garage now. I keep them organized the way he did. I do not use most of them, but I cannot bring myself to throw them away. They feel like the last conversation we never had. I do not expect forgiveness from him anymore. I do not even know if he would have needed it. What remains is the understanding that I waited for clarity to arrive on its own, and clarity only arrived when time had already closed the door. That is the part that stays with me as my days grow slower and quieter. Some things in life do not end with resolution. They end with recognition. And recognition, when it comes too late, has nowhere to go except into memory, where it stays unchanged for the rest of your life.